Something that's really common in web design is to have the concept of an active area of the page. Like, let's have an example. So let's suppose this was a much whizzier website than it is, and that I've just clicked on something that has made Chrysalis the active part. So maybe I want to, maybe there's some navigation that pops me here. Maybe I just want to highlight that we're talking about Chrysalis right now, this whole div. So I want to be able to put something in the HTML that says this section is active right now. So some other examples of active are navigation menus when you want to make, when you navigate to a page and you want to highlight its associated link up in the navigation bar. So that's one example. Let's see how we would make this happen in code, because it will reveal some interesting things that we can do to combine selectors. So here's my Chrysalis section down here, and I've decided that I want to mark a couple of things active. I want to mark the H2 as being the active heading, and I want to mark the div overall as being the active div. So here's what I'm going to do. Class equals active tab, say. This word does not matter. It could be named George. It doesn't matter what it is. You just have to be consistent between the HTML and the CSS. So the problem is I already have a class listed here. What do I do? Well, it turns out that in CSS, fortunately, I can have multiple classes. And so I just list them out with spaces in between them. So that solves that problem. I can have this H2 as an active tab. I can also mark this div as an active tab. And now in the CSS, I can decide what that should look like. So I'm going to decide for now on something very simple. I'm just going to say anything with an active tab, and maybe I'll put it up here. Anything that's an active tab will get a certain background color. Now let's say FF0. This is going to cause us some problems, and we'll suss them out in a minute. Okay, so now that I've marked those two things active, I would expect that both the div and the H2 have that background color in place. So let's see it. As I refresh, the H2 is working well, but I don't see a yellow background on my div. That's a little bit surprising. Let's take a look in the inspector. Here I've got my H2 highlighted, and over on the right-hand side, I can see that that rule is active. This is a great way to debug or to find errors in your CSS, or to just understand your CSS situation a little more. So I can click this on and off. Okay, that's definitely causing the yellow to happen. But if I select the Chris, I look down here and I see, oh, background color yellow is crossed out. What does that mean? Well, in this case, it means that another rule is overriding it. I didn't mean to do that, but let's scroll through slowly and see what other background type rules are in here that might be overriding. And I look and I see this one. This is a complete background shortcut. So if I do not have a color listed in here, the color gets set to just transparent. So this background rule is overriding my background color. If I uncheck it, you can see what I mean. I uncheck, this one gets crossed out, and now it looks like this is now active. I should see yellow. Well, I don't see yellow, but the reason I don't see yellow is because now that this .section rule property is turned off, it's reverting to my Chris background image, but it's repeating everywhere, so I can't see the yellow. But if I uncheck this for a minute, there's my yellow highlight. So it does understand that I mean active tab should be yellow, but it's just not getting there. In this case, my .section rule is just as specific as my .active tab rule. The browser can't decide which one is more specific. So this .section one is winning because it comes afterwards in the CSS. If you look here, .section comes later. This is overriding my background color. There's many different ways I could do this. I could move the .active tab rule to after the .section rule, but it would be safer for me to make this rule more specific. So how can I make it more specific? Well, I can combine selectors to make it more specific. So I might say, I want the this active tab background color. Let's focus on the section for a minute. I want this to be not only a class of section, but also an active tab. So this means look for class of section and class of active tab on the same tag. And just to see that in the HTML, that would be this. Both section and active tab on the same in the same place. So this this selector is more specific than this selector, so it should win, even though it comes first in the CSS. I'm going to save and then I'm going to refresh. And there, now I see my background color. So this is an example of working with some multiple classes and then also combining your selector, your class names in the selector so that you have a more specific rule that will override a less specific rule. Just the way that I can combine two classes in the same rule, if I wanted to combine something like an ID with active tab with a class, something like that, I can totally do that. That's completely legal. If I wanted to even make this super specific by putting the div tag in there, this is matching a div tag with an ID of Chris on it, also with the class of active tab on it. So you can do some very powerful things with CSS, and you can affect how specific a rule is. Basically, the more specific the rule is, the more it will win when the browser is trying to figure out which rule to apply. And in the browser, you can start to get a sense of how the rules are playing together by looking in this right-hand side of the inspector, and you can check checkboxes on and off to get an idea. You'll practice this in some of the Khan Academy selector exercises.